Week 4 of the fantasy football season kicks off tomorrow on Thursday Night Football, and everyone is looking to set their fantasy lineups. In today's video, I am going to help you do exactly that, going through every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way up until the doubleheader on Monday Night Football, and I'll be telling you guys what I think you should start or sit the wide receivers in all of those games, as well as how I believe they will finish by the end of the week. Before we can get into things, though, I would like to ask that if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. We begin with the Seattle Seahawks at the Arizona Cardinals. Now, at this point in the season, Jackson Smith-Njigba may rank top 3 in my confidence level at the wide receiver position. The dude is as safe as it gets, and I don't see that really changing at all. 3 straight games with 18 plus PPR points, and he is the clear focal point of the passing attack over in Seattle. Last week, he scored 20.6 points as the wide receiver 8 up against the Saints, playing just 49% of the snaps because they ended up benching the starters due to the game being such a beatdown. The Cardinals allow the 12th most points on a per game basis to the wide receiver position, so with JSN being such a safe week in and week out bet, you have to feel great about him as a top 6 option in this matchup. Now, I do think that we see Cooper Kupp's metaphorical chain get snatched by Torrey Horton in the Seahawks offense eventually. Outside of week number 2, where Cooper Kupp got fed like your fat cousin at Easter dinner and he had 7 receptions on 9 targets for 90 yards, he has been a 6 point per game type of guy. And honestly, I don't even think in either of those games he even ended up scoring 6 points. So with just 3 targets in each of those other 2 outings, Horton, on the other hand, has found the end zone in back-to-back games. I don't think I will be able to start Torrey Horton here's a who just yet because he hasn't gotten over 4 targets yet this season. But with him playing as well as he has, Cooper Kupp's value is basically in the toilet bowl. Speaking of the toilet bowl, that's where Marvin Harrison Jr. is. Maserati Marv is now Mitsubishi Marv after he has bent us over a table in back-to-back weeks. Look, we can blame Kyler, and we can blame the offense as a whole, the coaching staff, but at the end of the day, Marvin Harrison Jr. needs to catch the ball. He had 2 costly drops last week. One that would have been about a 30-yard reception, and the other that I believe was 30-plus yards and would have been a touchdown. He would have gotten a touchdown, but instead, the guy can't catch the ball. I still believe that Marvin Harrison Jr. has the ability to be a high-end fantasy option, but I think we need to start actually putting the blame on him and not just blaming Kyler and the coaching staff. He also, for some random reason, jumps to catch passes for no reason, right? The ball isn't sky high. It wasn't thrown too high from Kyler Murray. It's right at his chest, and he goes, yippee! He jumps a little bit like fucking Mario trying to jump into one of those pipes, and then miraculously, he's dropping the ball. It doesn't make any sense. My confidence level is in the dirt with Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, we did see him have that high-end game in week number 1 in New Orleans as the wide receiver 13, so the upside is there, but as of right now, he's buried as the wide receiver number 3 in that kind of range from wide receiver 25 through 36. I just think my confidence level is kind of shattered on him. For the rest of the guys here, any non-Marvin Harrison Jr. wide receiver in this offense are not even on my radar. On paper, the wide receiver 2 is Michael Wilson, as I think he is the most talented wide receiver on this roster outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., but that doesn't mean much when he gets just 3 receptions through the first 3 games of the season. Zay Jones is in the concussion protocol, so we should see more Dortch this week if he can't get out of the protocol, but none of that will ultimately matter because you cannot start him. Next up, we move to the beginning of the Sunday slate, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time in Dublin, Ireland. The cold like Minnesota Vikings going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Justin Jefferson, the world's safest driver, Jordan Addison Ray, is back from suspension from his wet, reckless charge, throwing even more confusion into an already tough offense to break down with Carson Wentz at the helm. We talked about this in the quarterback video, but I'm just going to rehash it here. Carson Wentz is good enough to win games for the Vikings by not turning over the ball and making sound decisions as long as the defense is able to play well. If the defense crashes and burns, well, Wentz will probably end up being on the struggle bus. This leaves Jefferson in a sticky situation. Jay Jettis has been a large letdown so far this season. I understand he hasn't been a complete failure, but based upon ADP, this is a disaster. Wide receiver 30 last week with Wentz against the Bengals. 5 receptions on 7 targets for 75 yards. The Steelers matchup is mid-range for wide receivers, so you definitely can't be sitting Justin Jefferson. But he is trapped in a bad situation, just like his LSU teammate, Jamar Chase, who we'll be talking about a little bit later. The ability is certainly there for Jefferson to overcome any situation, so you have to rank him inside the top 12, but the floor just doesn't really feel safe anymore. The floor is lava. Jordan Addison will make his triumphant return from his DUI suspension this week, which is cool if you drafted him, but with Wentz under center, I would prefer to kind of just see how this scenario plays out before throwing him out there, right? I think rolling him out there, first game back, especially in a different country, these games are always weird when they're not in the United States, so I don't trust Jordan Addison. If Adam Thielen couldn't get anything going without Jordan Addison, nothing is going to happen with Jordan Addison there. No need to even roster him at this point, but I told you that after week number 1. For DK Metcalf, back-to-back weeks with a touchdown for Metcalf, which is nice, but my hopes of Metcalf potentially turning into a reliable top 12 option just seems to be dead. With Aaron Rodgers seemingly normally locking into his wide receiver number 1, Arthur Smith's offense just isn't putting Metcalf high enough on the pedestal for him to be that high-end option. Now, obviously, he is still a fine start, and obviously, he still has that big play potential due to his speed, and he could score a touchdown any given week, and no one would be surprised at all, but in the worst matchup for wide receivers on a per-game basis here, in a game that, again, is overseas. These overseas games are typically very weird sometimes. They're just dog shit games that you watch on Disney Plus, and it's like Buzz Lightyear is playing wide receiver. I don't know if they're doing that in this game, but I watched the Falcons game last year where Bijan Robinson made a crazy play, and I'm pretty sure he was like Woody from Toy Story. So he is just a mid-tier wide receiver 3 at this point in the season. You feel fine about starting him, but you're probably not feeling like super ecstatic to have him here, especially due to the matchup. Now, in the 2 games that Calvin Austin scored a touchdown, he has scored 12 plus points. In the 1 game where he didn't score, he scored just 3 points. Now, I like stone cold Calvin Austin, but with how hit or miss this offense can be in brutal matchups for the wide receiver position, I don't expect Aaron Rodgers to come out swinging here. He is best left on your bench. Cousin Roman Wilson isn't even guaranteed to see a single target, so he's not rosterable. Next up, we move to the beginning of the 1 p.m. slate. The left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders at the hot Atlanta Falcons. Drizzy Drake London has been a disappointment based on the sky-high expectations I had on him entering into the season. Despite the Falcons getting walked like a dog by the Panthers last week, London was still serviceable as the wide receiver number 35 with 5 receptions on 8 targets for 55 yards. Michael Penix looked like he was playing that dizzy back game before every single snap, and he was also not only playing the dizzy back game, they fucking blindfolded him beforehand. This spot up against the Commanders has been great for wide receivers. It's the 8th best matchup on a per-game basis. So while you can't feel the best after how the offense looked as a whole last week, up against the Commanders defense, London should be able to bounce back as a low-end wide receiver 1. Also, he's coming off of that AC joint sprain, so, you know, we'll give him a little bit more of a leash. For the other Falcons, Darnell, here comes the Mooney, had 11 targets last week in Carolina, which turned into 4 receptions for 44 yards. If Mooney, for some reason, is available on your waiver wire, then you definitely need to pick him up. But based upon how Penix looked last week, only Drake London would be worthy of starting. Shout out to London Tipton. Though, if you are in a pickle, there are far worse options out there than Darnell Mooney. Ray McLeod, he's one of those guys that we'll just talk about every week, how if he magically had 3 catches for 150 yards and a touchdown, you would never be surprised, but it's never going to be like, you're never going to be able to just actually see that coming, so you're never going to start him. For the left hands up, who are we? The Commanders. Terry McLaurin is dealing with a quad injury and went to visit Dr. Williams Myers to evaluate this injury. Now, anytime you hear about a player that is visiting some outside doctor, I start to panic. This could mean, now again, just could, I'm not saying this does, but this could mean that Terry McLaurin has a sports hernia that could sideline him for 3 months. Would I full on panic right now? No, but it is never good when you read something like this. I definitely am worried, so I highly do doubt he plays this week. Whether or not Jaden Stormy Daniels returns, this is huge news for Debo, who would now be the locked and loaded wide receiver 1 in this offense, who started off the season as the wide receiver 6 up against the Giants and the wide receiver 17 in a tough spot up against the Green Bay Packers. Facing the Falcons defense that got diddled by the Panthers last week, I feel great about Debo as a high-end wide receiver 2. Now, Christian McCaffrey's little brother, even if Terry does miss a significant amount of time, they don't really have a clear wide receiver 2 behind Debo for me to make an argument to start any of these guys. Sure, if someone steps up, we'll talk about it in the waiver wire video. We'll talk about it in next week's wide receiver video. But as of right now, there is not a concise consensus wide receiver 2 without Mr. Terry McLaurin. Next up, we got the New Orleans Saints at the No One Circles the Wagons like the Buffalo Bills. But before we break down this game in depth, as well as the rest of the games on the slate for week number 4, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description, you will receive a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds, as well as if you play $5 in the pick'em, you receive an additional $50 in bonus funds. How the pick'em works on Underdog is incredibly simple. You pick 2 players, they're higher or they're lower. If both the picks hit, you get paid. If you do multiple other picks, they all have to hit, but the payout will be higher. Make sure you guys check that out. Promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Now back to the Saints at the No One Circles the Wagons like the Buffalo Bills. Now, Chris Olave leads the league in targets with 37, meaning he averages 12.3 targets per game. Since the offense isn't very good, and since the targets aren't always the most reliable coming from Spencer Rattler, Olave's ceiling is certainly capped. But the floor is incredibly reliable. Week 3 in Seattle, in a game where the Saints got their back blown out, he had 10 receptions on 14 targets for 57 yards as the wide receiver 19. I don't think anyone is excited about playing Chris Olave, but he continues to get it done week in and week out. He's like the pack-a-punch version of Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm Rashid Shaheed. If the Saints had a better quarterback that was able to actually elevate this offense more, Shaheed would be a guy that I would be very comfortable starting, but they simply don't. So he's not even a lock to score 10 points weekly. As of right now, the outlook on this offense is very bleak, so he would be a sit. Brandon Cooks, I'm still shocked that this guy's playing football, has yet to score 6 points so far this season, so there's no need to even roster him. For the Buffalo Bills, Shakir's targets have been bouncing all around. Week 1, he comes out the gate with 9. Week 2, goes in the opposite direction, he has 2. And in week number 3 up against the Dolphins, we meet him in the middle like Malcolm with 4. Now, in my opinion, this game will be a blowout, and I don't think you will see Shakir or any of these wide receivers getting a ton of catches because this game will get out of hand quickly. If Shakir, who is not a big touchdown guy, does score like he did last week, you will be fine, but this could easily be a 2 receptions on 3 targets for 22 yards type of game, and I just don't want to start him. Now, Keon Coleman started off the season on top of the world, King Kong banging on his chest on top of the Empire State Building. 50 Shades of Grey level dominance up against the Ravens as the wide receiver 2 with 8 receptions on 11 targets for 112 yards and a touchdown. Ever since then, though, just 7 targets with 6 receptions for 46 yards through the last 2 games. Maybe his day will come, but as of right now, again, in a matchup where I don't expect them to need to pass the ball a ton, I'm not interested in Keon. Joshua Palmer's targets have fallen off of a cliff since week 1 as well. Against the Ravens, he had 9, and he has just 4 over the last 2 games. Even with the Bills' offense being a wagon, and with them able to drop 40-plus points in any given game, Palmer is too far down the totem pole to even roster him. And if Dalton Kincaid and the other tight ends are going to be as involved as they were up against the Dolphins, this is very, very, very bad news for the receivers in Buffalo. Next up, we got the Cleveland Browns at the Detroit Lions. Now, after the matchup up against the Packers in week 1 for the Lions, the world was saying that the Lions are frauds. The world was saying that the Lions can't live up to these high expectations that were set on them prior to the season. And sure, they didn't look great in that game, but They have looked nothing short of fantastic. Shout out to Sue Storm ever since then. Amon-Ra St. Brown was the wide receiver 1 up against the Bears. He elbow dropped their ass in week 2. Wide receiver 7 up against the Ravens in Baltimore. Amon-Ra St. Brown has reminded us all why he's one of the best wide receivers in the league and one of the most reliable assets in fantasy football at the wide receiver position. You get it? He is a top 5 option for me every week, and this week included. Jameson Williams came out the gate of the game up against the Ravens, and things are looking mighty fine. If you had Jameson Williams, you might have been a little bit bricked up at the start of that game. 2 catches for 43 yards. Man, oh man, is things looking up for Jameson Williams. After that, he didn't get a single other reception, and at this point in the season, he is exactly what I thought he would be in the summer, and that is a high upside boom or bust wide receiver. Through 3 games, he has busted twice, paused, and has been a top 12 wide receiver once. In a game that has little shootout potential, the upside of that big game is a little bit more capped, so J-Mo's in that wide receiver 3 range. Isaac Tesla looks good when you see him get targets, but he has yet to see over 30+% of the snaps, so starting him at this point would be silly. Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman are the wide receiver 1A and 1B in Cleveland. Any given week, these guys could flip-flop on who has more targets, and neither guy really excites me here. The matchup is good on paper for wide receivers on a per-game basis, but the Browns' passing attack gives me zero confidence in either guy. Both Jeudy and Tillman peaked in week number 1. Jeudy was the wide receiver 32, and Cedric Tillman was the wide receiver 18 up against the Bengals. I am just beyond tired of dealing with this scenario on a weekly basis. If you wanted to start one over the other, I lean with Jeudy, but I would prefer to sit both of them. Isaiah Bond saw his highest amount of targets last week with 4 and his highest amount of snaps. You just can't be starting the wide receiver 3 on a Joe Flacco-led offense in the year 2025. Next up, we move to the Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans, the battle of the Oilers. Now, Alec Iomanner is the only start-worthy wide receiver on the Titans at this point in the season. Him and Cam Ward appear to be on the same page, and when he gets targets, he actually catches them, unlike Calvin Ridley. Back-to-back top 28 showings with a touchdown for Iomanner. Not in love with having to rely on him at this point in the season, but with a slightly, not really a strongly above average matchup. This is just a ever so slightly above average matchup. He belongs in the high-end wide receiver 4 range, and if I talk myself into him more, because I really do think he's a good player, I may be able to bump him up to a low-end wide receiver 3. Calvin Ridley has yet to crack the top 50 at the wide receiver position. The targets are clearly there with 21 on the season, but the production just isn't there. The connection with him and Cam Ward just doesn't look great either, and neither does Calvin Ridley, because as we just talked about before, he's been dropping passes left and right. Until we start to see some more reliable games out of Ridley, he belongs on the bench, but based upon the target share alone, things should be coming his way positively soon. Mr. Business Decision Tyler Lockett should not be rostered in any format. Nico Cousin, let's go bowling. Collins unleashed the beast like the alcoholic monster beverage last week in Duval. 8 receptions on 11 targets for 104 yards and a touchdown. Now, the offensive line is going to prove to be incredibly frustrating for Stroud and Nico Collins, because Nico Collins might be wide open, always open, fucking 7-Eleven, and CJ Stroud is getting hit before he could even throw the ball. But with Collins being as good as he is, and with him being open, I do believe big games are going to be coming more often. Back-to-back games with the score, he is a must-start top 10 option for me weekly, and this week up against the Titans that are a top 5 matchup for wide receivers. You gotta feel great here. Christian Kirk saw 8 targets in his Texans debut last week, which is promising going forward if the offense can start functioning better. 3 receptions on 8 targets for 25 yards. Good matchup here, but I just haven't seen enough yet to justify rolling the dice on him here. Xavier Hutchinson, 3 targets in back-to-back games for him, but with Kirk back from the injury, no need to roster him. Next up, we move to the Carolina Panthers at the New England Patriots. One of the easiest games to break down at the wide receiver position. For the Patriots, this wide receiver core is busted for fantasy football. It's a disaster. Trying to figure out who to play is a terrible game to actually play. Sure, Booty should be the wide receiver 1 in terms of snaps. Collins ranked 2nd, and Diggs ranked 3rd. On the season, Diggs leads the team in targets, followed by Douglas and Boutte, and neither guy averages more than 5 a game. Diggs leads in receptions with 13, Booty has 9, Hollins has 6, and Douglas has 5. Douglas, Booty, and Hollins all have a touchdown. Stephon Diggs doesn't. So until the team gives more snaps to Diggs, I am not going to be touching a single Patriots wide receiver in this game. The only wide receiver I'm willing to play is going to be Tetero McMillan. T-Mac has had 8+ targets in every single game of his rookie career so far. Last week was a dud as the wide receiver 48, but that was a game where the Panthers cruised to victory up against the Falcons, winning 30-0. So you can kind of just toss that game paper toss style into the garbage. Prior to that, he was the wide receiver 22 in week 2 up against the Cardinals, and the wide receiver 30 up against the Jaguars in week 1. The Patriots allow the 6th most points to wide receivers, and this should be a more competitive game, allowing McMillan to be more involved. Thus, I got him as a high-end wide receiver number 2. Renfro went balls deep into the Cardinals in week 2 as the wide receiver 8. He followed that up as the wide receiver 98, just as I alluded to prior to last week. One great game shouldn't make you oogle and ogle over a player. Clear sit, and frankly, I don't even think you should roster him. No non-T-Mac wide receiver is startable on this team. David Moore, on paper, is the wide receiver 3, but again, not startable. Next up, we move to the Los Angeles Superchargers at the New York Football Giants. Now, at this point in the season, I think you have to rank Keenan Allen the highest of the wide receivers on the Chargers. 3 straight top 18 showings with a touchdown in every single game. Even with the tough matchup last week up against the Broncos, he was the wide receiver 12, going 7 of 11 for 65 yards and a touchdown against a Giants defense that you might as well call the little guys, as they allowed the 2nd most points to wide receivers on a weekly basis. I have Keenan as a mid-range wide receiver 2, and honestly, he's kind of in that high-end to mid-range wide receiver 2 range. While Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston have had their time in the sun to shine, they have had so much fun. Ladd McConkey has been stuck in the corner like a cuck choking his chicken while his wife gets ransacked. Less than 10 PPR points in back-to-back games have me wishing I could go back in time from drafting him and stop myself from doing it. But with this offense looking as good as they do, the pendulum will swing the way of Ladd McConkey eventually. The man looked far too good last season for this to all fall apart and for him to be useless, so I have faith. Shout out to Dutch, and I think that I still got to rock with him as a top 24 wide receiver, even if, I get it, it feels gross. At this point, if you wanted to rank Quentin Johnston ahead of Ladd, I am not going to judge you. 3 games, 3 total touchdowns, 3 straight top 23 showings, and the targets are coming hefty. In a great matchup here, just like Ladd, he is a low-end wide receiver too, and by the end of the week, when you guys get my full wide receiver rankings video, make sure you guys are subscribed if you haven't already to make sure that you can see that. I may flip Ham and Ladd and end up putting QJ ahead of Ladd because, again, Ladd has really been strong this season. So you're starting all the Chargers. All the Chargers you got, you're firing them up. Malik Neighbors. After we reached the top of Mount Everest as Malik Neighbors owners in week 2, when he beat the ever-living shit out of the Dallas Cowboys, dropped his nuts straight down the throat of them, teabagged them, 9 receptions on 13 targets for 167 yards, and not 1, but 2 touchdowns. It was BOGO, buy 1, get 1 free up against the Cowboys. He followed that up as the wide receiver 89 against the Chiefs. Now, the team has pulled the plug on Mr. Unlimited, so hopefully we get some more consistency out of Neighbors going forward. Now, this could be a dud showing, as Dart could get lost in his rookie debut in a tough spot for wide receivers for Neighbors. But you didn't draft Malik Neighbors to be a pussy and sit him after 1 down game, so I still got him as a top 10 option. With this being the first start of Dart's career up against a solid Chargers defense, I am fine throwing Malik out there because Malik Neighbors is Malik Neighbors. He's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. The same thing cannot be said about one Dale Robinson, Mr. 305. Once Dart gets his sea legs underneath him, Robinson can become a weekly starter, but as of right now, he's best left on your bench. Darius Slayton got his snaps cut in week number 3, and even if he goes back to playing 95+% of the snaps like he did in week 1 and 2, he isn't remotely involved enough to be able to start him. Next up, we got the Philadelphia Eagles at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. People are saying this is the game of the week. While I have shit on A.J. Brown all season and I took a dump on his chest Cleveland steamer in the summer, the big game was bound to come his way. Wide receiver 4 up against the Rams with 6 receptions on 10 targets for 109 yards and a touchdown. The Eagles offense locked in, and during the second half looked like a completely different team in the second half of the game. The Bucs matchup is not great for wide receivers, though we did just see Garrett Wilson look great against them last week. At the end of the day, with A.J. Brown, you're going to deal with the highest of highs and the lowest of lows this season. That's what comes with being a part of a team that's as good as the Eagles. They don't necessarily always need to throw the ball a million times. They could just win games by not really having to do much offensively. So that does make A.J. Brown a very, very big risk, right? Where they easily win a game and A.J. Brown has 3 fantasy points reading a book on the sideline, right? In games like last week where they end up seeing A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Eiffel Tower defense, you gotta have A.J. Brown ranked highly because of that. And I hope if you are an A.J. Brown owner for you, that he's able to build on what he did last week. Just like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith had his coming out party last week. 8 receptions on 9 targets for 60 yards and a touchdown as the wide receiver 9. And just like A.J. Brown, there are going to be ups and downs all season because the ebbs and flows of the offense. I like him as a high-end wide receiver 3 this week, but again, you can never really be shocked if he ends up being a complete and utter dumpster fire. Jahan Dotson had a solid showing up against the Cowboys. Since then, he has just 11 yards. He is a waiver player. With Mike Evans expected to miss multiple games with a hamstring injury, Emeka Egbuka elevates himself to become the locked and loaded wide receiver 1 in that offense. There are rumors of a potential Chris Godwin return, as he is expected to practice on Wednesday. If he does play, I would throw him out there as a high-end wide receiver 3 based on the upside alone, but the risk is going to be very high with him. He could easily score 2 fantasy points, so, it's kind of just a risk tolerance type of play there. Some of you guys might not even have a choice because of what's been going on with wide receivers. You might just have to YOLO and play Chris Godwin. Egbuka has been a top 32 wide receiver every single week of the season and has seen his targets increase every single game. So even if Godwin is back, I still expect Egbuka to be the number 1 target, slightly above mid-range matchups for wide receivers in a matchup that just saw Puka and Adams tee off upon the Eagles. Happy Gilmore style. Egbuka is a high-end wide receiver numero 2. General Sterling Shepard will operate as the wide receiver 2 if Chris Godwin misses. So you could throw him in that YOLO range of the rankings video where you just say, fuck it, I'm playing him. Maybe he'll get me a touchdown. If Godwin doesn't play. If Godwin plays, no way you can even get remotely close to starting him. Next up, we got game number 10. Indianapolis Colts at the Los Angeles Rams Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Michael Pittman has looked great so far this season outside of week number 2, where I told everyone he was a trap like I was Admiral Akbar. He finished as the wide receiver 64 in that game, but was the wide receiver 8 in week 1 and the wide receiver 13 last week up against the Titans. He feels like the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense and has been playing incredibly well with Daniel Dimes under center. So with this being an above average matchup for wide receivers, I like Pittman as a high-end wide receiver number 3. Josh Downs is still being eased in from the injury that occurred to him in the middle of August. He has yet to eclipse 60+% of the snaps, so until further notice, while the big play upside is still very much there with him, I don't feel good enough about playing him based upon his snap share not being the highest. With Alec Pierce dealing with a concussion, if he cannot go, Adonai Mitchell will step up as the wide receiver number 3, even with the offense cooking, and with this potentially being the highest scoring game on the slate, I would prefer to avoid AD Mitchell, especially due to how involved Tyler Warren is. For the LA Rams, at this point of the season, if you could rewind to when you were doing your fantasy draft, right? You roll back the tape, It's August, say it's August 25th. You're drafting, you're sitting there at your draft, and you have the number 1 pick. You might take Puka Nacua. You might. To me, it would be between Christian McCaffrey or Puka or like Bijan as the number 1 pick. Puka is as consistent as it gets week in and week out. Like I said all summer, even if Adams is still the guy, which we think he is, which he is as of right now, Puka is still going to be a target hog. 3 top 6 finishes in PPR in a row, and the man still hasn't even scored a receiving touchdown. His lone touchdown came on a 45-yard rush in what is projected to be the highest scoring game of the week. Puka is my wide receiver numero uno. Davante Adams has faced some tough competition through the first 3 weeks of the season based upon the corner that has gone up against him, and it just hasn't mattered. Week 1, he came out the gate a little bit slow as the wide receiver 41, but he followed that up as the wide receiver 9, and then the wide receiver 23 up against the Eagles in Philly. We know that Davante Adams lives in the red zone, and he has now scored in back-to-back weeks. If he could just figure out how to catch the ball a little bit more often, if he stops playing like fucking Quentin Johnston did over the start of his career, he would be a top 12 wide receiver every single week. I think that time will come. I still think Davante Adams got it. Unk still got it. And in a high-scoring matchup against a defense that is middle of the road up against wide receivers, you got to feel confident in Adams as well as Puka forming that Eiffel Tower over the Colts defense. Tutu Atwell would be lucky to see more than a target, so you're not going to be playing him. Next up, we move to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Duval at the San Francisco 49ers. Now, speaking about the Jaguars, Brian Thomas Jr. Shane Waldron should be tried for war crimes against fantasy football players. Shane Waldron leaves the Rams. You know what happens the next year? Cooper Kupp wins the Triple Crown. He leaves Seattle. JSN breaks out. He leaves Chicago, and Rome Odunze looks amazing. He joins Jacksonville, and Brian Thomas Jr. is fucking useless. He is useless. This makes absolutely no sense how this man is still employed by an NFL franchise. And he is here to ruin the Jaguars passing game as the Jaguars passing game coordinator. This man, BTJ, through 3 games, has 7 receptions on 25 targets for 115 yards and 1 rush for 9 yards and his only touchdown. Last year, he had 2 games with more receiving yards in those individual games than he has on the season. This is a tough matchup for wide receivers. But at this point, I think you kind of just have to die on the hill of starting Brian Thomas Jr. I demoted him down to being a high-end wide receiver 3. I genuinely think if my life depended on Travis Hunter scoring 10 fantasy points, I would be praying for forgiveness, as the former Heisman is nothing short of ass in the Jaguars offense. His snap share is not what Liam Cohen talked about in the summer, and he has yet to eclipse 70% of the offensive snaps and played just 53% last week, which was his lowest amount on the season. As he played more defensive snaps than offensive snaps, it also doesn't help that Trevor Lawrence blows, so Hunter is unstartable. George Parker Washington, this Jaguars offense is just so bad, man. It's so bad that Parker Washington had 4 receptions on 11 targets for 34 yards, and somehow people are talking about, oh, Nick, I want to play Parker Washington. Don't do it. Don't do it. The man had 11 targets, and he turned it into 7.4 PPR points. Not impressive. Not impressive at all. For the shoe, beat the Packers. Fuck, we didn't do our Colts song. We'll just sing it right now for everyone. This is our Colts. This is our team. We bleed blue. I know you guys are disappointed when I don't sing the song, so now that's just an added, it's like an Easter egg, right? For the people that just skip to the Colts to hear it. Nah, you had to go to the next game, listen to a rant about how Shane Waldron is a fucking asshole, and then you can get to the Colts song. Shout out to Seth, the guy that sings that song. Man, I made a joke about Seth. I was like, oh, dude, we're going to shut this dumbass up. The Dolphins going to do that in week 1, and then the Dolphins couldn't even score a touchdown until like the 4th quarter. But Brock Purdy is dealing with a head, shoulder, knees, and toes injury. Not really. He's dealing with a toe and shoulder injury and has missed the last 2 games. My assumption is since Mac Jones isn't fully healthy due to the PCL injury last week. That will just push Brock to actually play in a great matchup up against the Jaguars, who allow the 7th most points to wide receivers on a per-game basis. Pearsall appears to be a very reliable asset through the first 3 games of the season. I feel great about Ricky Rolex this week. 8 receptions on 11 targets last week for 117 yards. He is a mid-range wide receiver 2 for me. Juwan Jennings is also dealing with a million different injuries. He's dealing with a shoulder and an ankle. The injury gods just have not been very kind to the 49ers this season. If Jennings plays, you kind of slot him in as a lower-end wide receiver 3 to high-end wide receiver 4. He did end up outplaying Ricky in week number 2 when he was the wide receiver 11 against the Saints, but that was not the case in week number 1. He missed last week, so your guess is as good as mine if he does play, but with the upside of the 49ers offense, he is worthy of a dice roll. Kendrick Bourne, not even on the radar at all. Next up, we got the Baltimore Ravens at the Kansas City Chiefs. Flowers' hot start to the season has been put on ice as he was the wide receiver 89 last week up against the Lions with 2 receptions on 3 targets for 13 yards. I am slightly worried that my worries about this offense from the summer that led me to fade Zay Flowers may end up coming true. This offense has a ton of weapons, but they have a very run-heavy nature. With them spreading the ball around a lot, we could see Flowers being a very boom or bust option. While I do have my worries, though, his first 2 games were good enough to not be in full-on panic mode yet. The matchup here is a below average, but this should be a high-scoring game, so I got Flowers as a high-end wide receiver, too. For Rashad Master Bateman, he was the wide receiver 17 last week against Detroit, while Zay Flowers wasn't very involved. 5 receptions on 7 targets for 63 yards and a touchdown. But this is the Rashad Bateman special, right? You randomly have a huge game every once in a while and then disappear into the darkness of the night. Not going to magically jump in on the quote-unquote school bus, the metaphorical train of Bateman here and start him. So you got to stay away. A shocker to no one that actually has a couple brain cells. D-Hop doesn't score a touchdown last week and was a big, fat bust like Peyton Manning's head in the Hall of Fame. Who would have known that a guy that gets 2 targets a game can't be trusted? He will have solid games going forward because the offense is so good and he'll find the end zone. But, you know, why are people even rostering him? He hasn't even played over 40% of the snaps yet this season. For the Chiefs, Tyquan Thornton is the only wide receiver that I'm starting. I get Nick, he got lucky. He has 2 touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. But it's been back-to-back weeks, and Mahomes clearly likes throwing the deep ball his way. And if Thornton can keep coming down with those deep balls, it is going to pay dividends. All 3 games with 70+% of the snaps, 9 targets last week against the Giants. He is a very boomer bust play, but I am willing to start him in the wide receiver 4 range. I am just kind of sick and tired of Hollywood Brown. This dude just fucking stinks, and I'm kind of tired of trying to galaxy brain myself into starting him, even if Worthy isn't good to go again, which even if he is, I don't think he's going to be super involved due to the injury. I just can't do it with Hollywood. He is such a sexless, boring play. I'm not doing it. The TikTok GOAT himself, Juju Smith-Schuster, has been all right this season, but even in a fun game, why bother risking starting him when he could just be buried? He could just get like 2 targets in this game. Next up, we got the Chicago Bears at the Las Vegas Raiders. Rome Odunze has been a monster this season. Shout out to Nosferatu. 3 straight top 20 showings in PPR, and I don't think the train has any breaks. I expect a little better last week. Like, I thought he was going to do pretty fine last week. I thought he was going to, go crazy against the Cowboys, hit him with the sweet chin music, but Rome was 3 of 7 for 62 yards and a touchdown, so he's been fine, and he has at least 1 touchdown in every single game so far, and 4 on the season. In the 4th best matchup for wide receivers in fantasy football on a per-game basis up against the Raiders, you gotta feel incredible about starting Rome as a top 12 option. Wiki, DJ Moore had his best game on the season up against the Cowboys, which is just a common occurrence going up against that trash can defense. 4 receptions on 5 targets for 21 yards and a touchdown, as well as 3 carries for 7 yards. In a good matchup here, Moore is stuck in the mid-range wide receiver 3s due to Rome overtaking him, but this is a good matchup, so the upside is here for the taking. Luther Burden is still being outsnapped by Olamide Zaccheaus. Last week, 58% to 29%. Burden, even on a lower target share, is more likely to have the huge game just due to his big play potential that we saw last week, 3 of 3 for 101 yards and a touchdown. Ultimately, though, the biggest takeaway from what I've said about Burden should be, I like him, and I think he's talented, but he is not start worthy until his snaps come up. For the Raiders, Jacoby has scored less points each and every single week compared to the last one. He started off the season on top of the world in his revenge game up against the Patriots in Foxborough as the wide receiver 15. Last week, up against the Chargers, he was the wide receiver... up against the Chargers in week 2, he was the wide receiver 33. Last week, up against the Commanders, wide receiver 40. He only saw 4 targets last week after 10 plus in prior weeks. No need to hit the panic button, though, on Jacoby in a matchup that allows the 3rd most points on a per-game basis to wide receivers. I feel great about him as a mid-range wide receiver 2. Now, I don't want to overreact to last week, right? Trey Tucker was the wide receiver 1, dropping a 40 bomb straight on the domicile of the Commanders, 8 of 9 for 145 yards and 3 touchdowns. The odds of that happening again are just as low as it gets. So, not going to expect a repeat. Not going to expect him to ever even get remotely close to that on the season. But he has had 8 plus targets in back-to-back games, so his role as the wide receiver 2 in this offense is very cemented. 90+% of the snaps in every single game. I get he's still a big dice roll, and I could easily see him shitting the bed here, but I got him as a high upside wide receiver number 4. Unlike Tyquan Thornton, the other Thornton in the NFL, Dante Thornton Jr., has gotten 4 targets in 3 straight games and is yet to truly put up a big game. With the emergence of Mr. Tucker, Thornton should be on waivers. Next game here, because you waited all day for Sunday night. The Green Bay Packers at the Dallas Cowboys in Jerry's World. How about that scheduling? No CeeDee Lamb, no problemo for George Pickens, as Lamb got hurt last week up against the Bears and Pickens was the wide receiver 16. Back-to-back top 16 finishes out of George Pickens. Obviously, the Cowboys offense as a whole will suffer without Lamb, just like their defense suffers without Micah Parsons. Until Lamb can return from the high ankle sprain, that sucks. But Pickens should benefit from more targets. The Packers matchup, today, Junior, sometimes I can't read. The Packers matchup is brutal. The Packers matchup is terrible for wide receivers, so there's clear risk with George Pickens, but based on solid showings in back-to-back games, he should be able to finish as a high-end wide receiver too. I think Tolbert should be second in command here, behind Pickens, in terms of targets with CeeDee Lamb out. But in such a tough spot up against the Packers, I'm not getting cute and playing him or Kevontae Turpin. For the Packers, Matthew Golden-Scar looked good last week against the Browns in a horrific loss to a team that shouldn't even have been in a position to win the game. For Matthew Golden, though, 4 for 4, like he was at Wendy's for 52 yards and 3 rushes for 9 yards. He played the most snaps of his career with 71%, only outsnapped by Romeo Doubs. The matchup against the Cowboys can turn the average Joe into Calvin Johnson Megatron, so I will roll the dice with him as a wide receiver number 4. Romeo Doubs is in the same range as Golden. Probably more likely to score a touchdown, and probably, just based on his career, a little bit safer, but neither of these guys are the poster boys of consistency. With the Cowboys allowing the most points to wide receivers, I'm willing to take a chance on both guys, but I just think Golden's upside a little bit higher, so if I had both, I would lean with him. Dontavian John Wicks has yet to eclipse 9 points this season. Again, such a fruitful matchup, though. I could see him having a big game, but he's just more risky than the other options. Next up, we got the first of 2 Monday Night Football games, 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Can't wait for this one. The New York Jumbo Jets at the Miami Dolphins in the Miami Gardens. 2 of 3 games for Garrett Wilson with 22 plus PPR points has me feeling vindicated for getting shit on during the summer for talking him up, especially since he had 10 receptions on 13 targets for 84 yards and a touchdown with Ty Goat under center last week. The hope this week is that Fields clears the concussion protocol and can start because he is clearly better than Tyrod, but, and this is a big but, shout out to Eva Longoria, even if Tyrod is in, you should still feel real good about him. The Dolphins defense is terrible. They allow the 21st most points to wide receivers. So I know, oh, the stats don't say that, Nick. Well, guess what? The Dolphins defense is terrible. I watch every single game. The corners are burnt toast. Garrett Wilson is not going to have any problem, big fella, here. I can assure you, Garrett Wilson's going to go nuclear, top 10 option at the wide receiver position. Starting any non-Garrett Wilson wide receiver on the Jets is about as terrible of a decision as you can make. Tyler Johnson and Arian Smith honestly just sounds like players that when you're playing Madden franchise, right, and you're 12 years down the line and all the real players have retired, your wide receiver 1 is Tyler Johnson, your wide receiver 2 is Arian Smith. They sound like fake names, and they shouldn't even be rostered in 32-team leagues. Now, Tyreek Hill has looked far better in back-to-back weeks compared to the disaster against the Colts in Indy in week 1. Last week in Buffalo, he had 5 receptions on 10 targets for 49 yards and a touchdown. Now, the Dolphins' offense is incredibly suspect, and I'm not going to sit here and dispute it. And anytime Tua throws the ball, my asshole clenches because I'm afraid that he's going to throw the ball right to the defense. But at this point, this is a great matchup for wide receivers, top 10 for wide receivers, and in a game that Tyreek dominated last season as the wide receiver 5 in week 14, and it's also the game where at the end of the season, in week 18, he pulled in Antonio Brown and quit on the team in MetLife. I expect a solid high-end to mid-range wide receiver 2 showing. Just like Tyreek Hill, Jaylen waddled away, waddle, has been far better over the last 2 weeks, back-to-back top 24 finishes, and in both games, he found the end zone. Waddle also, like the cheetah, always plays quite well up against our little bro, the New York Jumbo Jets. So while the targets won't be coming as heavily for Waddle most weeks, he belongs in the high-end wide receiver 3 range in a solid matchup up against one of the most fraudulent defenses in the NFL. And I know people be like, Nick, how can you talk about the Jets like this? They're both 0-3. The fucking Jets are gonna kneel before us. They're gonna kiss our feet. This is gonna be belt to ass. And if it's not, if we lose to the Jets, oh man. Malik Washington has been talked about as like the Dolphins' Deebo Samuel. I think that's interesting. He's not as fat as Deebo though. But he's not startable because, again, the Dolphins are prone to just completely fucking everything up. Final game here, the Cincinnati Bengals at the Denver Broncos. Monday Night Football, 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Why watch one shit game when you can watch 2 at the exact same time over on ESPN? Last week, Brian Flores had Jake Browning in a straitjacket. Jake Browning looked like he had to wear those drunk goggles that they made you wear during Dare growing up, and genuinely, I thought that as a kid, that if you were to get drunk, that is what your vision would look like. Like, you'd be seeing like 18,000 versions of someone, and that is just frankly not true at all. That was some fucking Fugazi bullshit that they smeared onto us to make us think that if you drank, you won't be able to see straight. Even though it's kind of true, but it's not like that at all. I really... There should be a better way to figure that out, like to make the glasses look better. But who cares, right? We're fucking 15 minutes into this video. I don't know how many other people shared that same experience as me, but let me know down below in the comment section if you thought that being drunk was just like the drunk goggles. Now, if the Bengals were going from the tough spot of 4 wide receivers up against the Vikings to an easy matchup, I would come on here and be like, everything's going to be okay, guys. Don't panic. Jamar Chase will be fine. It's going to be okay. But against the Broncos, I am scared shitless. Now, you still have to play Jamar because, you know, even with bad quarterback play, he's live to score 30-plus points in any given game. So I got him top 12, but don't be shocked if he shits the bed. Tee-hee. Higgins without Burrow in a rough spot for the Bengals. Higgins is a desperation start at best. Sure, without Burrow in 2023, Higgins was more reliable than Chase. But week 3 didn't show that off at all. Just 1 reception on 2 targets for 15 yards. When we just talked about Chase, I said that I believe things will get better. And I do think that. But here, up against the Broncos, things are looking rough. He's a wide receiver 4 at best. I am worried about starting Jamar Chase, who's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. So you're not starting fucking Andre Yoshi Voss. Portland Sutton, after a horrid performance up against the Colts in Indianapolis, Sutton was the wide receiver 3 last week in LA against the Superchargers, 6 receptions on 8 targets for 118 yards and a touchdown. As the wide receiver number 3, Sutton is still the clear wide receiver 1 in the offense, even though tons of people are trying to crown Troy Franklin after one fucking game, buddy. Sutton is a high-end wide receiver 2 and an above-average matchup for wide receivers up against the Bengals. Franklin went from on top of the world up against the Colts as the wide receiver 7 to crash landing as the wide receiver 91. Does this mean that Franklin is now completely useless? No, he still played 79% of the snaps, and the only wide receiver near him was Sutton above him with 81%. Mims had just 44%, so Franklin still belongs as a bench stash, so you should not be abandoning him just yet, but you also shouldn't be throwing him into your lineup. After Mimsy came alive down the stretch of last season like his name was Frankenstein, he hasn't done much this season. 2 games with below 3 points and 1 game with 10.4 points. Just not interested in him since the snaps are not going his way, and the team clearly likes Troy Franklin better. Franklin the Turtle. Thank you guys all so much for watching. If you guys did end up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video to help you out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. If you need a dire answer to any of your questions, check out the Patreon, $12.50 a month. I answer all questions on there. I love you guys so much. Hope you have a great one. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen them already. Good boy!